I want to introduce Domhnaill. Um, so I attended an event by one of the big SIs where Domhnaill was speaking on the panel, and there were a lot of things that he said in terms of how you take your idea to building a product that related that I could relate to. As a startup, as having been involved in new businesses in bigger companies, and one of the things that I've learned is that you have to start with the customer and user and work backwards from that. Um, you know, Frequently we just go about designing technology without taking that into account, and as we replace jobs, this is even more important. So, Domhnaill, maybe you could start with just by introducing yourself, your background, how you ended up here.
Sure. I work for a company called Nokia. Well, Nokia Bell Labs is the part of the company I work for. So Nokia is famous for the days of cell phones and handsets, but today we're a leader in telecommunications equipment technology. So when you think about 5G, we're one of the big companies, one of the leaders in manufacturing, making 5G equipment and selling it to the operators like Verizon, AT&T and others. And Bell Labs, then you might know that name, maybe not. Bell Labs is the research division of Nokia. So we do R&D, quote unquote, but we really do very big R. So thinking about solving human need and industrial need challenges that are 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years out. So how do you leverage your fundamental understanding of the sciences and physics, and in my case, that and people and humanity and those more social aspects, and how do you bring them together on a fundamental level, and how do you build the future today, and how do you convince people that they should invest in your vision for the future today, even though that future might be 3, 5, 7, 10 years away. So, that's kind of where I come from. I'm a trained aeronautical engineer by training, and I have spent a lot of time across a lot of different disciplines and technologies and areas of interest. And more recently, I've been working a lot with the artistic community. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit today about how working with artists has completely changed my perspective, being an engineer and being around technology and being part of a technology company. And I really hope that you'll walk away from this with a different way of thinking about technology, a different way of thinking about humanity and the intersection of humanity and technology, and hopefully a different way of thinking about your role in this as technologists and business people, and especially the importance of data and what you do with that data. So this will be a kind of pretty broad topic-based conversation touching on a lot of different areas. I'm more than happy to interact with people as we go along. I'll take breaks every so often so we can chat. I would prefer this to be interactive.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer, if you don't believe what I'm saying, to challenge me in a respectful way. I would prefer, if I'm not making sense in an area or you'd like more detail or context, that you actually ask for that and we can talk through that. Or if I'm talking about a thing and you can't see how it could be possibly applied to your business, let's have a chat about that, right? Let's flesh it out a little, and we can do that after the talk or we can do it during, wherever makes sense. So I'm completely open, happy to be challenged, happy to clarify where things might not make sense. So let's get going.
Thank you. And just as you're sharing the screen, so just a reminder, if you have a question, ask in the questions or just raise your hand. And I'll bring you onto the stage whenever Domhnaill is ready to take a question.
Okay, so everyone see my slides, Hans?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
So, I tweaked the title just a little bit because I thought the other title was kind of fun, but maybe it could be regarded as a little bit fluffy. The title was, I think, How Do You Put Emotion, Heart and Soul into Industry 4.0 problem space. But I like this title as well, Bridging the Physical and the Digital with Our Humanity. And I want to share with you a little bit about my context and the way we think about the world, the intersection with technology and humanity, and how I think there's better and more interesting and more valuable ways to think about that intersection that we are completely under leveraging. So just to give some little bit of context on where I'm coming from. We all read a lot of these headlines about machine learning and AI, and I just think it's such a load of nonsense. It really drives me crazy to read these headlines. And it's clear to me that a lot of people that write about this and data and IoT kind of don't really know what they're talking about. And it's kind of headline grabbing kind of stuff. And it can be very disappointing to me. This is a very interesting article I read earlier in the year where they talk about this concept of the canyon of disappointment, which is the gap between AI's promise and the payoff that it provides. And I've read a lot of articles coming out in 2020 in particular where the consensus is that more than 50% of your quote unquote AI enterprise projects fail, which I think is kind of astonishing given the buzz around that particular technology. So a big question I have is, are the ML machine learning algorithms at fault? Is the data that are feeding those algorithms at fault? And of course, that's where data and IoT can play a very critical role. Is the combination of both of those things that's an issue? Or are we missing something entirely different? Is there failure going to happen here because we're taking the wrong approach entirely with respect to how we're capturing data, how we think we're going to use the data, how we're presenting that data to other humans in a business context, and how we might be trying to pretend like that data has value because it feeds some machine learning algorithmic beast that all it cares about data, but really what's the quality in that data and what is the purpose of that data? So I think a lot about these kind of things. I won't go into them in too much detail here unless you have questions, but it really brings me to this bigger question. Is it human versus machine, or is it human and machine? And of course, there's some applications that are extremely mundane and extremely well replicated by algorithms and machinery, where the machines will take over, the algorithms will take over. But I think there's an awful lot of applications out there, or business problems out there, human problems out there, where it'll be the combination of the human and machine that will solve those problems, that will drive and create the most value. And I want to give you a sense of that and why I think that way, and give you some examples of the way we are doing our research and development internally in Nokia and Bell Labs to be able to show the benefits of the human plus the machine. So let me start off by, people think it's a provocative statement, but I don't think it is. I'll try and prove this to you. But I believe that the future of innovation lies at the intersection of art and technology, and this will be powered by extreme cognitive diversity. And I'll talk about where that cognitive diversity comes from, but I truly believe the future of innovation lies at this intersection, and I want to explain a little bit why I believe that way. So, as I mentioned, my background is in aeronautical engineering. I did spent a lot of years in college in undergraduate and postgraduate and other kind of things. Have spent a lot of time working in industry across different disciplines, where I've worked a lot with academia, with startups. I've been very privileged to have a very broad exposure to lots of different technologies, businesses, everything, and skill sets. And across all of that, I feel like I have a model that describes the benefits and the disadvantages of, we'll say, the engineering or scientific approach, or the approach that designers and technologists take to solve problems. And I draw it in these very simplistic triangles to give you a sense of how I think. So this triangle here describes to me 99.9% of the population of the engineer, the scientist, the designer, the technologist approach to solving problems. They start with a problem that is of a certain size, and then they break it down into its most solvable chunks. And then they become obsessed in solving that particular part of the problem to the exclusion of every other part of that system within which that problem exists. So they go about problem solving in a reductionist way, big to small, in a very linear and logical way. So you ask an engineer, how do you go from A to D? They'll say that they pass through B and C. And there's great value in this approach, provably so. The advantages that the engineering or scientific methodology has given to humanity and our progression over the last couple of 100 years has been spectacular, right? I'm not denying that at all. But the way I've described it and the way I view it, and through my own training, I can tell you that it's become crystal clear to me that there are limitations to just this approach. And if the world is run by just this approach, I think we're missing out on other areas and opportunities. So to give you an example, in exactly the opposite way, this is how I view an artist. And this again describes 99.9% of the artistic creative population that I've been exposed to. So the artist or the creative, they're expansionist in their thinking. So they start with a small idea and it becomes a universe of possibility. And they go about that in a very non-linear and illogical way, at least non-linear and illogical in comparison to the way that we think as engineers and technologists. Ask an artist how you go from A to D. Often they might mention every letter in the alphabet and never even discuss B and C as an example. So you can see here that the way I've drawn these diagrams, they're exactly opposite, and they're as opposite as I have found any two fields or disciplines to be. And it's the nature of how different they are that causes a lot of tension between these worlds. There's different ways of communicating, different ways of thinking about the world, different ways of solving problems. But what I have found is if you can come up with methodology and frameworks to bring these two worlds together, there's absolute magic that occurs at that interface, and that you now have this holistic way of thinking about the world, the problems in the world, how to solve problems in the world, and especially so in how to bring humans deeply into the center of that solution space or that problem space. So this is what was very exciting to me a number of years ago when I was deep in technology. At the time, I was leading an organization that was doing innovation incubation, so taking our research ideas in early stage proof of concepts and turn them into full-blown products with our internal business lines and with our external customers. And I started having these conversations with artists around New York at the time. And it blew my mind that with all of my education and all of my professional experience and all of this stuff, that there was so much of the world that I actually was blind to, and I had no idea that there was this totally different way of thinking. And I became really enthralled by this different perspective, and I started seeing so much value in how an artist places the human at the center of what they do. So we today work with, in our program, about 25 artists all over the world, mainly though in North America and Western and Northern Europe. And we work with artists that engage with or use emerging technologies and multimedia. So emerging technologies like drones, robotics, could be spatial audio, could be ML, AI, and I'll give you some examples of these. So I'm not going to go through all of them here. I'll only give you a small sample of the art work we do, but you can just Google Bell Labs EAT, which stands for Experiments in Art and Technology, and you'll get to see more of this work. So maybe we can take a small pause there if there's any questions that around that whole philosophy or that different way of thinking. Do you think it's complete nonsense, or do you, from your own experience, do you see value, or have you seen value in this kind of ability to bring this level of diverse and different thinking together to solve real problems?
Yeah, we have a question from Chang.
Hey, Domhnaill. Hans, thanks for letting me talk there. Wonderful concept. I love it because I'm a musician myself, and I've got kids. I realize how much math and science and logic and order come together with arts and music. And lots of examples. I'll give one good example, and then I'll actually question you on another one. One is David Byrne, and it's funny you said "stop making sense" or whatever. That's a Talking Heads reference. He remember I saw him 15 or so years ago down at the Singular AT&T Nights at the Pier, and he had incorporated something I'd read he had done in the past. Him being like a Rhode Island Institute of Technology graduate, said in some interview, one of the greatest artistic tools out there for me is PowerPoint, because he just thought all these tools, all these words and stuff flashing in, and it was just like, man, it's not just bullet points. It's actually looked at differently from an artist's point of view. So I really like that, and kind of sits, I think, with looking at the different points of view you have there. But one thing that I followed a little bit about, and a question you add, maybe a third pillar to your philosophy, is what about biomimicry? Right? I mean, like IBM, Lenovo, those guys down at RTP have done some really cool kind of marketing around biomimicry. Why should humans solve problems when nature's already done it? So that was my question there.
Yeah, I think biomimicry is a very important area. I think, again, it's probably under leveraged. When you think about the power of nature and how nature has spent millions of years evolving to solve problems that they face in the most optimal way possible, I think we're completely under leveraging that. Now, there are lots of people in the world looking at biomimicry. One of the things I would say, although it hasn't fit naturally into the current projects we've done is that there are a lot of artists out there that are technically trained, that are artistic in their practice, and they leverage biomimicry to do very interesting things. So the ability to take their technical knowledge with the discipline of biomimicry and then be able to present it to the world through an artistic form and challenge new thinking, that's extremely interesting and valuable. And I again think there's not enough of that happening today.
Great, thank you.
That's true. All right. I think that was
Okay.
Thanks, Chang. All right. That was the only question.
Okay, so let me give you some examples to show you how we're bridging these two worlds, how we're taking the best of what we have in robotics, as an example, or emerging technologies, and we're bringing them together with our artists, and to give you a sense of the value we have got in that, not just from different thinking, but actual technological and business value. So, on the robotic side, this is what you typically see. This is from the technology and design side. You've got this very techno-dystopian way that robotics are designed and presented to humanity. And as long as this keeps on happening, there's going to be barriers to entry and there's going to be barriers to adoption because of the fact that the robotic elements are either scary and very industrial in nature, or they're kind of trying to be creepily human, like you see in that picture there. So with some of our artists, we've taken a different approach. So we've taken this more human-centric approach. So this artist is called Sugwen Chung, and she performs drawing collaborations with robotic arms, industrial robotic arms, or with swarms of robots. And through the work with Sugwen, what we ended up developing was new types of machine learning or machine vision algorithms to be applied in some of our smart city solutions, new ways to think about the presentation of that information, how to visualize it to be in a more easily comprehensible mode. And we also realized through working with Sugwen the vast power in your framework being around the bringing together the best of humanity with the best of technology. And through this work with Sugwen and other artists like her, we've ended up thinking a lot about this has been the lens through which we think about our technology, is how do we take the best of the technology with the best of humanity, and how do we build a solution that leverages the best of both those worlds, not to the detriment of either one. So let me just play a little bit of this video to give you a sense of the work she does, and then I'll move on.
That functions as a gesturally motion on the canvas.
When I first met Sugwen, I loved the line of her art. And ultimately, I don't think it's about the technology. I think that we, the technologists, facilitates the artist. And I'm learning something from them, and they're learning something from me.
What makes collaboration really interesting is that there's a lot of give and take and vulnerability that's required in it.
Okay, so it just gives you a sense of something different. Of course, that video is quite artistic in its output, but the learnings that we got through that collaboration and the process of that collaboration is where the immense value resides. So another big buzz area at the moment is virtual reality and augmented reality. And again, in my view, if you leave it to technologists and designers, this is the way we're being kind of dehumanized, right? We're expected to wear these clunky haptic gloves and these clunky VR goggles. And of course, this picture here is just for fun, taking it to the extreme. But this is kind of causing us to enter some kind of digital zombie apocalypse where these technologists seem to think that it's okay that we as humans will be forced to accept and wear all of this technology. And I just fundamentally don't agree with that. I think it's a very technological approach to try and solve a problem that doesn't exist. And we have a very different approach that we take now because of our artistic collaboration. So the one on the bottom right, I'll show you a video of that later in relation to another project. But the one on the right, I'm not going to show a video here for the sake of time. But this is work with Lisa Park. And Lisa's work typically senses the invisible interactions between people in social circumstances. And when Lisa worked with us, we wanted to understand the importance of touch, physical touch in the human condition, and towards understanding what is lost when we connect this way by being mediated by technology, right? So we're in different parts of the world, we're communicating through this 2D visual interface. What is being lost in our human connection because of the fact that there is this lack of physical proximity and lack of physical touch? So in this work, we ended up developing a solution where the leaves on a 3D holographic cherry blossom tree were activated when people physically touched in the space. But the reaction we got from people was astounding, where families and couples and even strangers got very emotional because of how they realized that that was a mode of engagement and a mode of human connection that has been quite substantially lost in modern times, with the fact that we've gone so far with our digital connections and digital technology. So this kind of work, to give you an example, instead of us thinking, which we would have done normally, and there's lots of people in our organization and across the world that will think that creating kind of robotic like haptic gloves is the solution. Working with Lisa made me at least realize as an engineer that this actually is the wrong approach to build deep human connection. This is causing a barrier. This will never replicate it. We have to think in a totally different way. Here's one on machine learning AI, again, to give you some examples of the benefits we've got from this type of work. If we look at the technological world today, people seem to have all these concerns about ML and AI. And honestly, I have a lot of issues with this community. I think they do their work a large disservice, because how they just throw algorithms out into the world that aren't trained well or trained on poor data. And then they kind of make up this excuse to say, well, it's not my problem that the data was bad, or it's not my issue that the algorithms are biased against certain parts of humanity. I really have an extreme issue with that whole mentality of that community. And I can talk some more about that because I have some insights as being a trained engineer in the physical sciences, that I think there's lessons that were learned and that are applied in the physical sciences that absolutely should be applied in these computer sciences. But we did work with this artist called Reeps1. He's a beatboxer. These are one of these people that can make their voice sound like a computer. And with him, and he and I have this issue with ML/AI, the world, and the way there's such a negative discourse around this technology. We both believe that there's massive potential for ML and AI to enhance human creativity if the data and if the algorithms are designed the right way for all of humanity. So we entered this collaboration to try and prove the creative potential. And the challenge we set ourselves was, he is the greatest beatboxer of our time, one of the greatest that has ever lived. For the last few years, he had felt he had reached the absolute limit of the capability of his voice, and he started moving out into different areas of artistic exploration. What we decided to do is, if we could enhance his creativity, enhance his capability of his voice by him being able to leverage one of these tools, would that be a very strong proof point that this technology could actually enhance the creativity of everyone? So what we did is we trained machine learning algorithms on his voice, on him beatboxing. And after a period of time, they reached a level of maturity where they kind of sounded like him, very much sounded like him, but the algorithms gave him back techniques and sound that he had never done in his life. So think about that. He, as an expert, trained the algorithms. The algorithms then developed sounds and techniques that he never performed, that he certainly didn't give them in the training process. And now from that, what he's been able to do is we've developed a solution where he can real-time collaborate with what we call his second self, so this AI digital twin. And through that process of this real-time collaboration with this thing that's kind of like him but different from him, he has what he calls leveled up his voice. So he's now creating new sounds and techniques and new modes of musical composition because of how it's completely altered his perspective and challenged him to use his voice in a new way. So think about that. If you take one of the best in the world ever in beatboxing, a super creative person, if we can help him be more creative with this technology, what might it do for the rest of us? But a big question is, and I'll come back to this, well, what's the data that feeds that? What's the purpose? What's the end goal of that data? What's the end goal of those algorithms? What is it you're actually trying to do? Are you trying to displace humans, or are you trying to enhance humans? And what your end goal is will determine everything else in the chain before that, and that will determine if you do a thing that's bad for humanity or good for humanity. And this type of questioning, this type of ethos, this type of a way of developing technology and leveraging technology for the benefit of humanity is deeply at the center of everything we do, and it's deeply at the center of why we work with artists, because without artists, I cannot get that kind of sensibility. I don't have access to that in any other scientific discipline. I don't have access to it through the engineers and technologists I work with. This is very unique to these artists that we work with, and that's where the value lies. So I'll just play a 1-minute video clip of this work. You can see a whole documentary we developed with this artist online. If you just Google We Speak Music Bell Labs, you'll see there's a 6-part, very short documentary series. But this culminates in this video where it shows the training process where he's training the algorithms. They're trying to mimic his voice, and then eventually he gets to a point where it's as good as him but different, and he can start kind of collaborating with it. So let's play a minute or a half of this or so.
One, two, three, four, five. 1 minute. One, two, three, four, five. Enough of his rosum. As listen. And for with VDM and this exploration just
Okay, for the sake of time, I'll leave it at that, but you can all just check that out online. And actually, that room that was that took place in is an anechoic chamber we have in New Jersey, which was for many decades the quietest room on earth as per the Guinness Book of Records, and it's a very special place. It's a very cool visual room, an acoustic room. So maybe we can take a quick pause there if there's any questions about any of those projects or the merits of kind of thinking about technology that way.
Mark is.
Oh,
Hey, Mark.
hi, Hans. How are you doing?
Good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, quick question. Actually, I have probably 100 questions I could ask you, Domhnaill. That's very interesting, but I'm going to stick to one. So you talk about working with these groups that include real divergent thinkers, the more creatives, the artists, and real convergent type of thinkers like the engineers and the scientists. Personally, I come from the more convergent side of it. I have background in physics like yourself, but my wife is a curator, so I have a lot of artists in my life that I've worked with. One thing that I notice is that in those two worlds, there are very different ways of communicating, almost like speaking different languages.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering is when you're working on these projects, what do you have to do, or do you find you have to do things to facilitate or translate between those two worlds to help them communicate with each other to be more effective as a group or a collaboration?
Yeah, that's critically important point, and I would say a large part of our success of this program is the fact that we've spent a lot of time designing and implementing exactly what you said, that aspect of, well, first of all, the curation aspect. Why do we pick the artists we pick? Because if you're doing work like this in a big tech company like ours, in the industry we're in, if I pick the wrong artist and it's a disastrous collaboration that goes nowhere, my program can be killed very quickly, right? So I have to be very careful in the curation to make sure that both sides of the equation, the artists and the engineers, have the right open-mindedness and flexibility and are willing to compromise and see things a different way. And then when you have the selection process done, especially in the early stages, how you bring these two disciplines or sides together, right? So I have to be there. I have to do translation. Sometimes I have to do mediation when it doesn't go well. But you need someone that can understand both worlds and that is able to very quickly do a translation. And what I end up doing is I do a lot of that early on when we're starting collaborations. Then I back off and I'll keep an eye on things. And sometimes things go badly because there's miscommunications or misunderstandings. And I might have to then come back in at a certain point and start helping each side understand that they're actually saying the same thing, but they might not quite realize it because of those considerable issues of communication. And I would argue there's a reason that there aren't a lot of successful examples of this type of work. And the reason is because people seem to think that you can just select an artist, just select your engineer, put them in a room, and something will happen. And in fact, that's entirely wrong in my understanding. You have to put the hard work in to understand the human side of it, to your point, the communication side. And the difference is, if a Martian came down speaking Martian to me tomorrow, that's the difference in communication that I've observed largely between artists and engineers. I mean, you cannot get any more different than those two worlds in every sense, but especially so in the communication side. So yeah, that's a spot on observation.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. Save some of the other questions for later. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, you carry on.
So let's kind of talk a little bit where, when I was thinking about, your IoT hub and the work you might be doing and where IoT and Industry 4.0 and other trends I'll talk about, where is that all going and how might some of this work I've been doing with art and technology, how might that play a role? Kind of brought me to the conclusion of the importance of mirror worlds, or the metaverse as people call it. So this is kind of a digital twin but on steroids. So instead of it being a replica of a particular product or something, a mirror world conceptually is the full digital replication of our physical entire world. And I think about it then beyond that, right? I mean, it's not just a physical representation of our entire world, it's how you do things beyond that. And I'll talk a little bit. So I think that this concept for all of you might be very interesting, the concept of a mirror world and how data and algorithms and technology will decide the future of humanity, basically. So just a bit of background. A mirror world, or the metaverse as it's sometimes called, is this new construct where the internet meets augmented reality and virtual reality. And it goes way beyond the concept of a digital twin. So if you think about the way things are today, with the internet, you go to the internet, right? You go to a web page on your phone or your computer. But in the mirror world, the internet will follow you everywhere. And the internet will be accessed and connected to everything. And what's really profound about this is, in my view, you as a human being will now, in a mirror world, exist between the physical and the digital. So today we fully exist in the physical and we access the digital via, we'll say, web interfaces. In the mirror world, your existence will be rooted directly between the physical and the digital. There might be no time in your life, maybe not when you're even sleeping, but maybe when you're sleeping, but there might be very few times in your life in the future when you are fully just in the physical. Now, that's that's kind of profound, right? I mean, think about the ways that this is going to change humanity, change the way we communicate, interact, do work. This is really interesting. Now, that's the most profound kind of question I have about a mirror world. And of course, the questions of data and everything else come into this. Another kind of minor one, I don't really have anything profound to say about this, but I'm super interested in the fact that in the physical world today, if you want to make an object smart, you add a sensor to it, right? But in this mirror world, any object can become a smart object. So I can have a rock in my garden that has no sensors, no connection to the internet, and that might become a smart object in this mirror world because of the ability to overlay information through AR and VR and things like that. It's kind of, I don't quite know what to say about that other than there's a new way that we're going to exist, and there's ways things are going to change beyond our comprehension. And I'm super interested in those changes, and I'm also interested in what are the tensions that will occur in our humanity, what are the barriers that will be created, and what are the detriments to our humanity that will be caused because of this transition. So when I think about this, there's this confluence of many, many, many megatrends that I believe will all kind of come together within the mirror world. And this is the minimum 2030, but I think possibly even 2040. I'll talk about that in a second. But some of the trends are spatial web, 5G, 6G, Industry 4.0, AR, VR, you name them, right? You can read them there. There's a whole pile of them, and I probably missed some. And all of this, I think, will come together in what I would call like a hyper mirror world that goes beyond just the digital replication of the physical world, but actually enables you to do things in new ways that we never could have imagined before because of the constraints of the physical world. Now, I want to show you a video that will give you a sense of what this mirror world might look like, so you can see conceptually this overlay of digital information on the physical. But I also want to share that this video comes with a warning, and the warning is the level of monetization of our attention, monetization of our humanity, and how we might become bombarded with digital noise in the future is kind of scary to me. And I'm going to convey that through this video, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Estoy libre de mi ira, estoy libre de mi tristeza, y el amor es mi esperanza.
Habla español.
Okay, so that's just a short clip. You can look this up online. It's a much longer video, but I think this is very interesting to consider. Let's just take the lessons learned from today and today's technology. Think about how your attention is monetized on social media. Think about the issues of digital loneliness because of our virtual connections to people as opposed to our physical social connections to people. Think about deep fakes and fake news, and think about all these things now that might get amplified by a factor of 1,000 if we live in this type of a mirror world. And think about what might be the downside consequences to humanity and to our humanity. So this is a big question I have, is how do we develop a mirror world? How do we leverage all of its benefits? And I believe there will be lots of benefits, by the way. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but how do we leverage all of its benefits and not harm humanity in the process? And how do we start asking the right questions now about how this might negatively play out, so we can start designing out those negatives from day one, instead of just pushing this tech out to the world and kind of stepping back and saying, oh, well, I could have never known that there would be a pandemic of digital loneliness with social media. I would argue you should have known, and you should have asked the right questions. So this is kind of a big motivator for some of the work we do, bridging the physical and the digital with our humanity and asking the right questions and developing solutions the right way day one. So, you might ask, well, okay, I think this is the next internet, the internet that we know today, which has revolutionized humanity and the way we live and work. I think this could be the next internet. Now, I think it could be what the internet is today. This might not have that kind of influence till maybe 2035, 2040. I mean, it's a little bit of time away, right? So the question for us then in research is, and this is kind of just more the strategy of how do you solve big problems in the longer term while also at the near term generating business value and value to your employers. So we want to be developing this mirror world solution sometime in the future, but there has to be some kind of a stepping stone towards that. In my case, I'm in research in this art and tech program within the context of Nokia as a large company who want to actually generate revenue and have products coming out soon. So we're looking at how do we build some of the tenets of this technology into something that's more of nearer term relevance to our industry, and that's around industrial automation. And in particular, we're looking at the concepts of supervision and surveillance within or enabling higher levels of industrial automation. So this is just kind of more on the strategic side, that for me to get here and for our industry to get here and the world to get here, and for me being employed by Nokia, I need to start thinking about this much longer term problem space and solution through the lens of being able to solve some nearer term problems up front. And we use these nearer term problems as stepping stones towards what the ultimate goal is. And that's really how you change the world in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You have to be able to build these sensible stepping stones in advance of that. Where I'm most interested in, for me and my team and my organization, and as you can gather from this talk and the way I speak, I'm interested in how do you keep humans at the center of this while achieving what I would call extrasensory perception. How might we leverage this new virtual world to break the laws of physics, and how might we augment humans the right way? So think about this. We have certain limitations and constraints of us because of how we are as humans in the physical world. We will not have those same constraints when we start living in this hybrid or fully virtual world. We'll be able to do things completely differently. So how do we do those things in a different way, a valuable way for us personally, for us professionally, while at the same time kind of keeping the human condition at the core of our thought process? This is a really big challenge, and this is why I share this kind of work because I hope more people will start thinking more like this. So very quickly, okay, our industry is all about 5G at the moment. But 5G hasn't really taken off the way people had hoped. I don't think it's going to be the savior for our industry. A lot of people are very interested in the area of enabling industrial automation. So how do you bring a private wireless 5G network, or 4G network for that matter, to some enterprise, and how might they have their own private wireless access network set up on that premise that they can start then leveraging and running all of their different automated technologies on that particularly private, very reliable, very secure wireless network, versus using Wi-Fi today, which has lots of issues. So we're looking at supervision and surveillance. Doesn't really matter. Lots of interesting problems around in the sensing the world space. We in my team work on one part of this where we're developing human robotic interaction design for the robots that would be treated as mobile sensing platforms. But a really big area of interest for us at the moment is how do you build this virtual world? How do you leverage the LiDAR or photogrammetry data? And how do you leverage machine learning, AI, and AR, VR to actually present this digital existence, this virtual world, to a human being with all of this complexity, all of the data of a smart enterprise? And how do you do it in a compelling, coherent, and human-centric way? So just to give you some examples of the nearer term work we're doing, and then I'll give you a sense of where it might go, bringing artists in. So we've looked at, how do you build this world and how do you convey all of the complexity of this data to a human being so that action can be taken and value can be derived from it. So we're looking at bringing together best practices in game design, map design, XR, interactive applications, and of course, social sciences. And we all do this all through this human-centric lens of art that we have. So we're looking at collaborations with different artists that have skills in these areas. We have our own skills in my own team where I employ creative technologists. We work with the technologies that are coming out of the labs and elsewhere. And we try and take a very holistic approach to what's the best practice across all these different areas to develop the most compelling solution. I won't really say too much more about that other than I'll show you some examples here very briefly, but I'm showing you the virtual representation, but the virtual representation is fully tied to the physical. And this is an actual model of one of our locations in New Jersey. And we can control and access and see through the cameras on robots and drones, and we can understand the movement of people in this space. And we're trying to figure out now how do we distill and synthesize that information and then present it to someone in a useful way. So very quickly, I won't go into it here at all, but how the way you present the information to a human being is critically important. And we've seen other solutions that overly complicate the presentation of the information and do it in a very rigid way. And that's why people fight these solutions. So if you're in a startup or you're trying to sell someone one of these solutions based on you've smartified an enterprise, you've put sensors everywhere, now what do you do with that information? Well, how you enable them to access it and how you enable them to visualize it and how you enable them to understand how they might control or not control that is very important to actually sell it as a solution. So just one other example, we are doing a lot of building a lot of solutions around COVID at the moment, as you can imagine. So how do we understand and build in monitoring of social distancing with respect to COVID? How do we look at the analytics of that? How can we do predictions in the future of where issues might occur? How might we leverage our robots to be able to help someone go from point A to point B in the most COVID safe way within our facility? All this kind of stuff. And then in these kind of game engines, so this is all built in Unity. I must say very quickly, we've built this full solution out in just a couple of months with 2 people, less than 100% of their time. And it's very interesting that you can start leveraging the inbuilt analytics and the ML and AI within the game engine in Unity to start doing very smart things. So for example, let's just say that one of your sensors detects that someone has COVID-like symptoms. Then you will trigger certain action to be taken based on that. But you can also then go back in time through all of your sensing and understand if that is the case, what are the objects or people that might have been susceptible to picking up those symptoms from that person because they have also have symptoms. And then you can start being very smart about how you can, as quickly and proactively as possible, put policies in place or take action for the safety of the whole community. And of course, there's you have to think about privacy and security and all those things. Of course, we do that because we're in telecommunications and that's a core to what we do. So part of our work is how do we develop these solutions so that you can leverage all of the data, but you don't get into these big issues with privacy and security and those kind of things. So then to show you kind of an interesting aspect, that was much nearer term for, towards a particular solution that we're developing in Nokia at the moment. To give you a sense of where this might go with an artist, right? So I showed you pictures earlier of people wearing VR headsets and AR goggles and everything, and I find the whole thing quite dehumanizing. So we had a question with one of our artists, or we wanted to develop a solution to the problem of how can you have some people experience this virtual world without them needing to spend 8 hours a day wearing a heavy VR headset? And we did this in the context of the opera. We were working with the Finnish National Opera. This is a Finnish artist. And the big challenge we had was to give them a vision for the future of the opera. And the future of the opera is, how do you leverage emerging technology and immersive technology? And how do you bring more and more people into the opera that might not have had access to it in a normal sense? So with that challenge in mind, what we ended up doing with this artist was developing a solution that you can see here, where some people in the physical space, and there can be many people, they can collaborate and work together and view into the virtual world by moving these physical and 2D interfaces around the physical world in interesting ways. And they can do this collaboratively because there could be many people. At the same time, you have the second video. They can also enter the virtual world through a 2D interface that they control, like this swivel-mounted kind of monitor. And at the same time, as you would have seen in the top video, we can also have people that are in the physical space or that are remote that might choose at certain times to enter through a VR headset. So the interesting thing here is instead of the typical technologist way of, let's just put VR headsets on everyone, and that's very isolating from a human point of view and everything else, and very uncomfortable for them to wear for any length of time beyond a few minutes. With this artist, we came up with this technique to be able to leverage many different forms of technology, 2D, 3D, in collaborative forms and individual forms, and allow people to choose how they would want to enter this virtual world and be able to in a smart way, in a human way, bridge the physical and the digital in different ways. So this is an example to you of how working with artists can completely change your perspective and will cause you to create technology in new and interesting ways that you never would have, and to solve problems in ways that you never thought you could achieve. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So just wrapping up here very quickly, I didn't talk about it too much here, but a theme I have, or a concept I have, or a way that I describe this ethos or this philosophy is around humanizing technology. So, lots of people have talked about user-centric design, and then it became human-centric design. I think human-centric design is a marketing kind of buzzword in design thinking, honestly. I don't think human-centric design goes far enough in understanding humanity. And I'll explain what I mean by that. What I mean is, humanity has evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to be a very particular way we have. And there's no doubt, and I'm not denying it, that we've invented and co-evolved with technology. But we've spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving towards a certain place where we are in the human condition. So this part of our humanity is hard-coded into our DNA for the last few 100,000 years. And what we've done recently in the last 20 years or so with this kind of digital and online technologies, we've moved very quickly away from some of those core tenets of the human condition. And I think this is causing obviously a lot of tensions and barriers in the world, but there's also a lot of opportunity cost associated with this. So I'd ask you, to consider your role in business, technology, and as leaders in how you contemplate how your technology is going to be used, not just today, not just tomorrow, but also in the future. And are you leaving opportunity on the table because you're maybe not thinking about the human condition, not just the human consumer, not just the profile of the human consumer, but what it means to be a human? That's what I mean by humanizing technology, or that's what I mean by human-centric design, is to consider the human condition, not just the human as an individual and as a consumer of your tech who presses buttons A or B. It's a totally different philosophy. And then just very quickly, thinking about IoT and ML/AI, I have some big questions like, can data ever capture our humanity? And what parts of our humanity do you lose if you train algorithms on limited, biased, or bad data? So I don't think it's good enough just to take data and then throw it over the wall to a machine learning algorithm. And those machine learning algorithm people use the data without even contemplating where the data came from or its value or how it should be used. And they then throw those algorithms over the wall to us as consumers and expect that, or don't expect anything. In fact, they just throw it over and they just think, well, that's my job done. I don't care if this does good or does harm. So I think this is a big question for me. And I think working with artists will help you start asking these questions, start thinking this way, and start framing problems and solutions in a totally different way. Is automation always a good thing? I don't think so. I think sometimes it's definitely a good thing. And I think there's other times where it's the human plus the machine, some kind of a hybrid automation that I think might be far more valuable. I kind of talk about this. So then, finally, what level of productivity and efficiency gains could we achieve if we used machine learning and AI to enhance human creativity instead of just designing technology that replaces humans or makes us slightly better? What if we made us orders of magnitude more creative? I don't even know if that's possible, but is that a worthy thing to work on? And if it is, then what data might feed that? And will that data do good or do harm? So these are kind of some of the types of questions I would have now as a technologist, as an engineer, that I never would have asked prior to me working with the artistic community. But now that I've worked with them and now that I understand their sensibility and how they deeply think about our humanity and placing humans truly at the center of everything we do, this has opened up my mind to a whole new way of thinking about technology and how technology can either do good or harm. And also that you can develop good technology for the good of humanity and also generate a lot of revenue. So anyway, I'll close it out there and we can have a discussion. Please connect with me. I'm happy to have any kind of follow-ups if you have an interest in any of these topics at all. And let's just have a chat for a little bit.
Thank you. That was awesome. So you actually reminded me of so a couple of years ago, I was in doing a factory tour with one of the big consumer packaged goods company. And I noticed people were walking around with clipboards and they were tracking things like inventory and schedules on a whiteboard. And I asked them, in this day and age, why are you still using these 19th century tools? And they told me they had rolled out iPads and screens into one of their factories as a trial run. And it had such a negative impact on productivity. They ended up not rolling them out anywhere else because the people working on the factory floor, they'd been doing these jobs for years, right? And so they were used to doing things one way, and all of a sudden, I'm sure engineers designed this solution and then just threw it out there and didn't think about how what impact it was going to have. Now this is awesome. I'm going to go check out the videos for sure. So I have a couple of questions here. Yi, I'm going to bring Yi onto stage.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm not on video because I have my Oculus headset behind me. I'm trying to hide from you. So one of the questions that I had when you're going through this around the arts and the EAT is that is there a purpose of figuring out the technology from, I guess, a less intrusive, more artistic way, and applying that to other industries, or is this solely for the arts?
No, this is no, absolutely not solely for the arts. So what we end up doing, I can talk a little bit about our residency program to answer your question in a slightly longer way. So my observation of the world today, or most of the world, the way they engage with artists, it's either one of two buckets. It's either very transactional and short-term, driven by the marketing division. You have a new product, you want to make it look cool, engage an artist, pay them some money, work with them for a week, and then it's kind of go away artist, we never want to deal with you again, right? Very transactional. Mm-hmm. Or it's very ad hoc. Ad hocly, I know that's not proper English, select an artist, ad hocly select an engineer, put them in a room together, and then kind of just say, maybe something good will come of it. We do it in a very different way on purpose, and it's very purposeful. We select our artists with great care, and then they work with us for at least a year at a time in deep collaboration. the first few months of that relationship is pure exploration. They get to know us, our people, our culture, our technology, get to meet as many people as they want. And after a period of time when they're comfortable, they will pitch us what their big collaboration is, what the big project is they want to work with us on, with certain people with certain tech. So the only constraint there is that we have a research vision that we apply to this program. It's kind of like the strategic lens that helps us to select all of our decisions. And once their project can fit somehow within that longer term research vision, which is very broad, I can share it with you, then we're going to be okay with it. What they will do is select the technology and the engineers and researchers to work with. Those technologies then will be, what we'll want to get out of it is give access to the artist to that technology that they wouldn't get anywhere else because they're working with us and it's coming out of our labs. And that helps push their access to technology and their creativity at new levels. But at the same time, our engineers and scientists get access to their way of thinking, which completely pushes their work in a totally different direction. And that can go in two ways. The artist will either force us to use our tech in a way that we never envisaged, completely different ways, 5, 10 different ways that our engineers say, I mean, I've spent 10 years working on this and I'm the world expert in this. I never once thought that my thing could be used that way, which is super interesting for them. And that is an incentive for them to engage in this program, as well as other reasons. And the other thing is sometimes the artists come to us, and this is a very valuable part of working with artists that I think others can leverage in business. They come to us with what you might regard as some kind of a wacky, artistic, creative idea. Like, I'm an artist, I'm interested in understanding the relationship between people and space. I want to develop a large warehouse space with projections on all surfaces, including the floor and ceiling. I want to track hundreds of people in that space, and I want to be able to move them in certain ways to be able to change things based on their social interactions, how they move between each other, how they move with the space, how the words they use, and everything. Right? Excuse me for a second. So they come to us and we go, there's absolutely no way we can do that today with today's tech. And you might think, well, this is a waste of time because what has that got anything to do with the future of our business? But what you end up realizing is that might be a creative problem space they have today, and we have to invent to solve that. But in the process of inventing the technology to help the artist with their creative need, we've now invented new technology we never would have. And now we've started solving problems in a space that will become more relevant for our industry. So you could imagine in 10 years' time, it'd been very important for companies like Nokia and others in this concept of a mirror world to be able to monitor and track, I don't mean monitor in a negative way, to hundreds of people in the space and how you can move that space and alter that space based on their social dynamics, as an example. So it's not just for the betterment of the artist, it's for the betterment of the engineers, it's for the betterment, hopefully, in time of the company. And we are not, I'm very open about sharing these examples and the benefits of this work. It's not something we're keeping in an IP restricted way to ourselves. I think more people should do this for the betterment of humanity.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I was looking for some of those examples, which I think you just provided. So thank you for that. It's a great topic, by the way. Thanks, Hans, for putting this together.
No worries, Yi. Thank you. Yeah, actually, watching your example with the your campus in Murray Hill, you could easily do that for factories as well. Yeah, we just had just before Christmas, we had a company called Bright Machines, and you know, one of the big challenges in a factory is the changeover time, and they've made that software enabled. I can see using the model you have where you can start playing around with, you know, what if I change it here? Can I support the yields? That's awesome. A really good example. Okay, Carl had a question. I don't know if Carl is still here. Oh, okay, he's not. Who else? Okay, Eric.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. Fantastic presentation. This is so inspiring and exciting. I as a musician and aspiring artist, you know, as I hear some of the stuff you're talking about, like, oh, damn, I want to do that. And that hyper reality video that you mentioned, I think I found the link. I watched that. If it's the one you were talking about, it was about 4 years ago. It was absolutely amazing video, and I posted the link up to it. But my question to you is serious but humorous. In working with the various people, engineers, artists, and I hesitate to say versus, because I think there are some of us who are both, but one of the things that I'm personally trying to learn right now is tolerance of ambiguity, which I realize is a shortcoming of mine. I have a terrible tolerance for ambiguity, and I'm realizing that to go where I want to. I was curious if you had any thoughts about that or experiences working with people. And
yeah, so I think we have a bit of a head start on that in the organization I'm in Bell Labs, because it's our role in Bell Labs to invent the future that's, as I said, 5, 10, 20 years out. And I know people working on quantum computation who are in Bell Labs 35 years working on this topic, and they don't believe that this will hit humanity for another 20 years in a real way.
Wow.
So I have to say we have a head start on dealing with ambiguity. I mean, if you can't deal with ambiguity in our organization, when you're trying to solve problems in the future that are far beyond most people's horizons, then you're not going to do very well. Now, with that said, I have to say that even with that said, a lot of our community still struggle with ambiguity. What I mean by that is they can deal with ambiguity in some dimensions, but not in all. So they can deal with technological ambiguity because that's what they're used to and trained in, but they can't deal with ambiguity of different perspectives or different ways of communicating. So part of when I talked about curation earlier, a big part of what I do is to be very sensible and kind of strategic, whatever that means, but being very sensible in the engineer I select to work with the artist, and the artist I select to work with the engineer. I would only select engineers that I've had enough exposure to, or that have shown an interest in the program and I get to know them, where I get a sense that they will be open to that level of that type of ambiguity. And then, as I said, I have to spend a lot of time helping them navigate that throughout the entire process, especially at the start, but certainly throughout the entire process. And especially at the start and especially at the end, when we start doing real work, like we're developing a project with an artist and it's going live at a South by Southwest or CES or whatever. When we're in that kind of crazy, stressful moments of trying to make real stuff happen that's going to hit the public, then that's again when people revert back to having issues with ambiguity. So it's a lot about getting a head start by picking the right people initially, but then I have to spend a lot of time sharing with them my philosophy on this work and where ambiguity will come, when it will come, how to deal with it. And you deal with it a lot by helping our engineers be in a very low risk scenario. So they know when they work with us, they're taking some of their time out to do this work because they're interested in it. It is tied to their technical objectives somehow through the company. But if this project fails, it's not on them. They will not be punished for it. I make sure I have their management support throughout the chain of management so that they can never fall into issues that way. So you have to think about this really in every possible way. When you think that engineer might have a tension or suffer some kind of an issue being part of this, I need to, as the person that runs this program, remove all of those tensions in advance as best as I can. And when you do that, then now all of a sudden the ambiguity has dropped,
right, and
the risk has dropped, and the tensions have dropped, and for all parties it becomes a much easier mode of collaboration. But the upfront work, and this is back to the whole human condition thing. I don't just think about the human condition with respect to developing technology. I think about it with respect to who we collaborate with and how I have to help them get the best result out of this collaboration and not be painful for them, because if it is, they'll never do it again or it won't be of value. And then why am I doing this work at all?
So would you say that if I would condense what you just said, that the antidote to intolerance of ambiguity is risk management and risk assessment, and lowering risk actually is the most important point?
Yes, and that's that's my philosophy on innovation, like aside from this art and tech work completely, because the Cap Gemini event, Hans, that you mentioned that I was on, we were talking a lot about scaling innovation there, and my entire ethos around innovation is around the strategy of risk and understanding risk. And I think not enough people understand risk. I mean, they think they do, but in their actions, it's clear that they don't. So, yeah, I think about it in every dimension I can, and I remove those barriers or those risks from the equation as much as I possibly can. And then I spend a lot of time communicating with the artists separately, with the engineers separately, and then with them together.
Mm-hmm.
And then at times I back off, and then I have to kind of come in again at certain times and see how it's going. So I try and do it in an organic way. But yes, risk management of risk, the strategy of risk, understanding of risk and the human condition is beyond important.
Right. And comprehension of risk, because I mean, I know my own personal journey is one of like saying, wait a minute, all these thoughts in my head, these worries these are figments of my imagination. I'm creating this. This isn't real. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen if X, Y, Z happens? Oh, it's really not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, can I dovetail another question on here, Hans?
Sure.
So this one is really malformed. And it's just an experience I had recently, and you might have some thoughts about this. But the local university's art department has some series, and I was very excited to virtually attend this one thing. It had to do with smart devices, and they had all these questions. And I started watching this thing, and I'm like, what is this? This is just junk. And I was so disappointed. I mean, I was really trying to stay open-minded as I was watching this, and I don't know. As I said, there's not much of a question there, but have you ever had an experience like that where you just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I do a lot, maybe more than I could. I'm particularly sensitive to the overuse of innovation, how things are called innovative, how people are called innovative, and how products are launched as the greatest innovation in the world. The reason I get worked up by it is because the overuse of the word innovation actually dilutes technology ability to help humanity. And I have a kind of a tagline that is, if everything is innovative, then nothing is.
Right.
So this is a big issue, and it's because of market dynamics and investment dynamics and all of that stuff. And we won't go into it, but the way things have to be marketed to be successful, when there's often nothing of substance there. I know it's the world we live in, but it drives me absolutely crazy. And I think it's another example of, we have people who are super smart in one dimension. We'll say engineers, technologists, right? They, best in their class in a certain degree, engineering, whatever, computer science. Super smart in that dimension. So they're technologically intelligent, but they're people stupid. And what I mean by that is, when this example you gave, you didn't give the details, but did they contemplate at all how that technology would be of value or not of value to an actual human being? No, they're trying to solve a technical problem, and they think that they can develop a business around it. And
actually, this was from the artistic side. This was a judgment that I had on an artistic presentation.
Okay, well, it's the same. I mean,
and I think, yeah, you just because you say something's artistic doesn't mean it's artistic. It was so demoralizing, though. Oh my God.
Yeah, all right. I think we all.
All right. Strategically oversized bearings, I think, is the best of him. It's not IoT, but that's the one I laugh at. So, all right, thank you very much. Awesome presentation.
Thanks, Eric. How are you doing for time, Domhnaill? There's one other person. All right. Let me bring Mark back on.
Okay. Hi, Domhnaill.
Hey, Mark.
As I was listening to you talk and how you're really focusing on the human dimension of this, I mean, not even really a human dimension, about humans and how technology works in society. I was reminded of a lot of examples we got recently from companies like Facebook and Google about how what can seem to be a very neutral technology like AI can become very biased as a result of the society that it's deployed in. And so it struck me as, particularly as you were talking about some of the more futuristic dreams of what this might become, that the question of morality starts to move center stage. And what I was wondering is if in your working with artists who frequently I think are more attuned to that aspect of humanity, if you found any ways or begun to get any insights in how one can deal with the perception that technology is neutral and the reality that it's not?
Yeah, so I maybe have a slightly different take on that. I think it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? I believe technology. I mean, technology in itself is neutral. Technology doesn't have agency in itself, right? I mean, it's this non-human thing. Doesn't have consciousness, doesn't have a desire, doesn't have will, doesn't have its own morality. I mean, it's just a thing. It's a tool. All technologies we use are just tools under the umbrella of technology. So I think that way. So when I think about the issues that emerge out of the use of technology, I really deeply think about, to your point, the morality of the leaders and the executives and the people in business behind it. So there's two parts of this. It's the lack of understanding of the people that make the tech, of the dire consequences that might occur, and there's the lack of understanding of the executives that make decisions on where their investments go in tech and how that tech is given out to us as consumers. Both sides of those, for different reasons, are under different pressures, and both sides, either through education experience or because of market pressures that force nearer term thinking, can't allow themselves to see outside of that at all. So I firmly put the blame not at all on technology, because I think tech is just a dumb tool, but it's three things, I guess. The people that are making it, the people that are making the decisions on what's been invested and given to humans, and us as consumers. We shouldn't be a dumb part of this process. We should be able to stand up and say, wait a minute, why am I spending 5 hours a day on flicking through Twitter on my smartphone? Maybe that's not the best use of my brain or my time. So I think, morality is a very interesting, concept to think about. It's part of the human condition that I would say in general. And I think there has to be a societal change to our expectations from these businesses and our expectations on ourselves for how we use the technology.
I think that generally speaking, I'd agree with the idea that technology is neutral. The parallel that really kind of struck me between what you're talking about in the future and what we've seen so far would be Facebook to something like that immersive hyper reality, because in Facebook, we're finding out, and I think it's pretty clear that the technology itself was specifically designed to take advantage of the way that the human brain responds to various stimuli. Yeah. In which case, I would say that you couldn't really say that the technology itself was neutral if it's specifically created in order to generate a sort of addictive response to it. And I think that as one talks about these more immersive systems, certainly the possible overload of input is an issue. It struck me, though, that Facebook is a sort of good cautionary tale that illustrates that it could also become much more of a kind of motivating factor, or you could design into it ways of very subtly but very effectively controlling behavior.
I agree 100%. So my take on, to use Facebook as an example, is I think they had a good agenda very early on, right? Connect the world or whatever and build these social spaces. But unfortunately, what happens with a lot of companies, is market pressures and market forces took over, where now there's an expectation for them to grow revenue in a certain way, at a certain pace. And if they don't do that, then they're done. So this is a big issue that I have with the construct of the world, and I guess you could call it capitalism or whatever, but not that I'm kind of fundamentally against it, but I think we have to be aware of the limitations of that. They take Facebook, they wanted to do a good thing, started doing very well, started growing, started having market pressures, and now all of a sudden the beast of the market takes over, and you cannot fight that. Like if you fight it, you die as a business. So they had to go with the flow. Now they start bringing in people, business executives, and that start generating revenue. And now all of a sudden they start thinking, well, how can we take this technology like MLAI and how can we start using it to our advantage so we can trick users to use our platform more, and so we can monetize their attention and their humanity. So, the reason I guess I'm not pushing back, but kind of trying to give a different perspective, is that what I worry about in the technology world is when people say the technology is neutral, the technology is not neutral, you're allowing others to take away the blame from the technologists and the executives who build the tech and make decisions around the tech. And in my view, they're 100% to blame. And they're just using the technology as a tool. So I'm a little bit against that language for that reason, because how I can see it being misappropriated. But at the same time, I do get what you're saying. I'm not arguing with the facts of what you say. It's just more the terminology and how I would choose to describe where the problem lies or the root cause of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with that, and I agree it is kind of a terminological issue. But as a practical matter, the end result still winds up being a technology that had a great deal of promise to be unifying, informative, educational, that has gone in a very different direction as a consequence of interacting with the world. And so when you talk about your focus on the human aspect of it, that seems to me to be a very important element of the human part, not just the benefits to humans, but the consequences of providing this as a tool that humans can use however they decide to use it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. So that was the last question. Thank you, Domhnaill. This was exactly as I expected. I've been getting feedback in the background from folks asking for a copy of your deck. Would you be willing to share it? Or yeah. And so I will. I'll post it somewhere and figure out a way to get it out to you guys. Otherwise, thank you so much. This was awesome. This is. I think all of us need to be thinking about this. And I have examples from 30 years ago where, technology was just thrown out and without taking into account how people are going to use it, and, more failures, right? So we waste a lot of time and money, which you could save by using this approach. So thank you very much. You're welcome back anytime. I'm sure people want to know more about some of these projects. Maybe we'll have you come back and talk a bit more detail, or maybe some of the engineers, because you have a lot of folks who are techs here, and I know they're interested in understanding how some of this stuff works. But thank you so much. I'm gonna when I end the session, it's gonna go back to the virtual tables. You're welcome to stay. It looks like there's about 13 people still left, and I don't know how many will hang out, but thank you again. And
thanks for the opportunity, and as I said, more than happy to have people connect with me and follow up if there's an interest.
Yeah, and let me know if you guys need to connect to Domhnaill. I can pass his contact information as well. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you in the lounge.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.